Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Around the Big Ten podcast. I am Mark Ivler, joined as always by Chip Minnick. It was a wild weekend in the Big Ten. Usually our recap show has maybe 3 topics or themes that we go through from the weekend. This show, we're going to have to go through every game because every game had an interesting component to it. But we're not going to bury the lead on this. We're going to start with James Franklin being fired at Penn State after just maybe an equally stunning loss to Northwestern at home after the stunning loss to UCLA. Drew Aller is out for the season. There is so much bad happening in Happy Valley right now that I don't think even the most skeptical people of Franklin and Aller coming into the year could have possibly imagined this for Penn State so far. Chip, I guess first of all, were you surprised that they fired Franklin so quickly?
Absolutely. I've said this before and nothing has changed my original statement. You never want to see anyone lose their job. It's just the harsh reality of the business that these coaches are in. But think about it. The reality, when you think about Penn State, it was only, a couple of weeks ago that they were the number 3 team in the country, this big game against Oregon. They actually rallied and had the lead on Oregon in overtime. And then everything has just completely gone, I don't want to say sideways. It's just gone completely downhill. Ever since that loss to Oregon, the loss to UCLA, which was a stunner, the loss to Northwestern, which was a stunner. And I will freely admit, I thought, we on our previous show, I thought, okay, this is going to be the week where Penn State is going to come out and they're just going to take it to poor Northwestern, and credit to Northwestern. Don't want to downplay that, but I just don't even know where you begin. So my long-winded answer is, approximately $50 million that Penn State is willing to pay to not have James Franklin coach for them. Absolutely, I'm stunned.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this a little bit in the past. I think even last week's show was the UCLA loss did feel like the beginning of the end for Franklin at Penn State. And we were thinking maybe like after the season or like later in the winter, if Penn State's out of the race, that, maybe a program like a Florida or something like that, if they fired Billy Napier or, someone like that would take a run at Franklin, and it might be better for all parties if at that point Franklin and Penn State can come to some sort of arrangement that makes sense for everybody and just him taking another job. I didn't have them losing to Northwestern on the bingo card, but Northwestern did what we kind of talked about last week, which is get on them early, because if you do that, the whole stadium is going to turn on their own team. We talked about that. That's really what happened. But yeah, I'm surprised that it happened so quickly. The other thing we talked about with his contract was, we hear the buyout. So we hear, like $50 million buyout, but we didn't know the language. Like, is it paid out over so many years? Is there like the offset stuff where if he gets another job, most contracts these days do have the offset language in it, where it's, if he gets, if Penn State owes him $10 million a year and he goes and finds a job for $8 million a year, Penn State's only on the hook for, that $2 million or whatever difference. That apparently is the case with Franklin. Apparently they are only on the hook for whatever difference in salaries James Franklin would have if he takes another coaching job. So there were some things in that contract that made it not as awful to have to pony up to buy him out. At least we assume so, because we assume he's going to go get another job paying him, probably somewhere in north of $7 million a year. But yeah, that was so fast. It's like they were just ready. It's like they had the finger on the button after the UCLA game. It was like one more time, and it's, we're hitting the button. And sure enough, that happened. It was a bit of a different type of game than the UCLA game. The offense actually played really well for a large stretch of that game. The defense couldn't stop UCLA at all. Northwestern, the offense couldn't get going. No big plays, and then the defense at the end, like you could argue the defense played fine the first, few quarters, but then at the end, they give up a 11 play, 75-yard touchdown drive. Then after the offense turns it over, they had multiple opportunities to just get a stop, hold them to a field goal, and they let Northwestern just run right through them and run the clock out. And so if you're Penn State right now, obviously they're out. I mean, they're out of the postseason at this point. They even winning out, I don't think saves them at this point. But what are you hanging your hat on right now? Because your quarterback's out. Your $3 million a year defensive coordinator hasn't really worked out so far. Your offense, which we talked about in the offseason, is like, this is my question about, like, can they really be a championship competitor, was I still don't like their receivers. But now it's almost like, is it the offensive system or is it the receivers? Because it's a new group of receivers, kind of. It feels like they have the same problem every year, regardless of who the receivers are. Are they just that bad at evaluating wide receivers and acquiring wide receivers? Or is there something deeper here? Like, that's something they've got to figure out. But they've got a lot of things to sift through right now.
Yeah, I mean, where to begin? I think, Jim Knowles, I think now that James Franklin has been relieved of his job, Jim Knowles is going to be the target of the Penn State fan criticism, fair or unfair. I mean, I completely agree with you. The defense completely imploded down the stretch against Northwestern. So Jim Knowles now is going to be the target. To your point about the poor evaluation, or is it the offensive system? I think it's a combination of both. For whatever reason, I think ever since the departure of Joe Moorhead, Penn State has never really figured out what they want to do offensively. And I think James Franklin, the blame rightfully goes to him. Like, he needs to kind of determine what kind of an offensive system they wanted to run. That's kind of where I feel genuinely sorry for Drew Aller. I mean, nobody wants to see, somebody conclude their career with an injury, and best wishes for a speedy and healthy recovery to Drew Aller as he prepares for a career in professional football. But I just never felt like Drew Aller that it ever really seemed to jibe in terms of what James Franklin wanted to do, or if James Franklin really knew what he wanted to do. Kolonecki, I always believed that James Franklin in his heart wanted to have kind of the offensive system that was more along the lines of when they were successful with Moorhead as the offensive coordinator, a mobile quarterback, dual threat. Now, granted, I've said this before on our show that, okay, they had a generational talent in Saquon Barkley that made that much more effective, but don't forget, they also had Miles Sanders. They've been able to have some really good running attack offenses. So my point is that I always felt that they wanted more of a mobile dual threat quarterback. It just never really seemed to really gel with Drew Aller. Now it's going to be, I think, to your point, what do you do for the remainder of the season? I think you're truly playing for pride. I think if you're the players that are there playing for Terry Smith, he's a longtime Penn State assistant, former Penn State player. Now I think you're not only playing for pride, but if you're the coaches, Kolonecki, Knowles, that you're pretty much going to be looking for employment at the end of the season. So you want to do everything you can to showcase that you're putting the players in the best position to be successful for the remainder of the season.
Yeah, and what's the buyout on Knowles? I mean, that's not as long-term of a contract, but you're going to be paying Jim Knowles some money too if you're going to make a change there. So they've got they're going to be going to the donors right now with their hands out. Please put some spare change in there. But it's going to be interesting to see how they put this all together now, because it is going to be so difficult. It's not just one thing they've got to figure out. They've got to figure out several things, and they've got to do it in a way that doesn't bankrupt their athletic department. So they've got a lot of issues right now, Chip. I guess just last thing as we wrap this segment of it up is, where would you turn? What are the calls you would make, or whether it's a couple of different people that you had in mind, or whether it's maybe stylistically, whatever you think, you're kind of in the driver's seat now. Where would you turn if you're Penn State?
Well, I like the fact that there are so many different names being bandied about, and I think it's just that's going to be the topic, for now, for the foreseeable future. The name that I would go to, and I've heard it, but I haven't heard it as prominently as like Matt Rule, and I know like I'll swing for the fences with Curt Cignetti. The guy that I would go to would be Manny Diaz, and here's my rationale on this. I'm not saying that this is going to get everyone all excited and jumping up and down, but my thinking is that Manny Diaz is, he's only 51, so kind of a younger guy. The fact that he's been at Penn State, he kind of knows kind of like the lay of the land, that his calling card is defense is something that traditionally Penn State has hung their hats on. Like that's kind of like the idea of like they want to kind of take pride in the fact of having a strong defense. So that's kind of where that would be my first inclination. Now, whether or not Manny Diaz wants to do it, I don't know, but I just think that, and this is just me, and I apologize to any Duke fans out there, I would think the possibility of being able to contend for a college football playoff berth as well as a potential national championship would be easier at Penn State with the resources available versus at Duke. And that's just kind of my thinking there, is that, there's a lot of fertile recruiting availability within Pennsylvania and the Northeast. So that's why Manny Diaz would be my first choice. But the fact that he was there for a couple of years, I think that kind of would be, a good thing for them to rely upon.
Yeah, I can see the leaps of logic there or whatever to get to him. Matt Rule obviously makes sense too. Does he leave Nebraska at this point? I mean, his comments the other day were interesting about, his family gets to watch the games from the stands, and you can't really do that everywhere, which was to me him saying no way. But there's some other names out there. I mean, like the one I haven't really heard too much, like Dan Mullen. Does Dan Mullen get another chance at a major program? Now, recruiting's not really his thing, so he would have to really surround himself with some good recruiters. I don't think it's hard to recruit at Penn State. I think they're in a really nice radius where they can recruit all those East Coast guys, Maryland guys. Pennsylvania's got tons of talent. You can get into Ohio. So would you surround him with maybe some young recruiters? Would that work? Or do you I'm thinking about like outside the box. What about like a Kenny Dillingham?
The only problem that I would have with Kenny Dillingham,
young, like energetic,
Oh yeah, is that I would just think that he's at his dream school. Like he's an Arizona State, guy, through and through. That's. I'm not saying that he's a bad coach. I think that he's an up and comer, and I just think that he might be saying, something, I'm where I want to be. That's kind of like the logic I also have with like Curt Cignetti, is that, okay, why should he go to Penn State and start over when he's already got the pieces in place at Indiana? And I think the point that a lot of people are starting to make about Indiana is like, okay, they're going to be in the college football playoff. So if you're Penn State, you can't wait until January to hire a coach. The transfer portal is going to come and go. You really can't wait. Like, you need a guy that can hit the ground running in December, which is kind of where, it's like, to your point about Dan Mullen, mine about Manny Diaz, I think you have a little bit more runway in terms of being able to, all right, we need to try and salvage, and you know this better than most when it comes to the recruiting side of things. That's the name of this recruiting class, is salvage, because guys are already starting to line up official visits from the 2026 class. Their 2027 class is completely vaporized. So I just think if you're Penn State, you really can't play the waiting game. You have to kind of have your list, be making the back channel calls, all this kind of thing. I agree with you. I also think that Matt Rule, the fact that he has such a strong personal relationship, not that that's a bad thing, but the fact that he has such a strong personal relationship with Pat Kraft, that might actually make it more awkward, because the fact that they are such good personal friends, if things don't go necessarily well, the fact that the fans are kind of like, wait a second, his record isn't really that much better than James Franklin's. I don't know. I just think that, another name that I saw, maybe you've seen it, Eli Drinkwitz of Missouri. I think that's intriguing, but I just think a guy that, like you said, it's like Dan Mullen is originally from the Northeast. He would have like in the fact that he has an offensive background would be a benefit. To my point with Manny Diaz, he's been at Penn State as an assistant, knows the lay of the land, younger guy, defensive calling card. So that's why I think that, like finding these guys that can hit the ground running in December, have the big splash, try and, like do what you can with the recruiting class and really like build the foundation for 2027 would be the focus I would try and take.
Yeah, I think 26 is almost shot. I think you're doing this now at this point for the portal and for 27. I'll throw one more guy out there, which again will be a little bit outside the box because he doesn't really have ties to Penn State. He's been in the Southeast pretty much his entire career. Is like someone like Brent Key at Georgia Tech.
Like him. I like him a lot.
7 years old. Obviously has Georgia Tech in a position to potentially make the playoffs this year, which would be incredible. Would you be able to pry him away? Part of me is like, well, Penn State's such a better job. But the other part of me is like, well, the ACC is such a better league to be in right now if you're a head coach that wants to win, because you're not going against Oregon and Ohio State and, now Indiana's, turning into a top flight program, and the ACC is kind of a mess. So I don't know, but that's another guy I kind of would throw out there. But it'll be interesting to see kind of who realistically pops up. The other thing, when you do things like this, like, yes, okay, you're preparing, you're letting everyone know the job's open, you're letting the back channeling start, but like, you're not going to get even, let's say you can get who you want. Let's say you can get Matt Rule. Let's say you could get Cignetti or Brent Key or anyone like that. They're not going to leave in the middle of the playoff run. All those guys are still in the playoff run, and Cignetti's like Indiana's like in at this point, like there's with their schedule remaining and everything else. So these guys aren't going to quit in October or November, take your job publicly, get absolutely crushed by the media and the fans for leaving in the middle of a playoff run and go start recruiting for you. Like, that's just not going to be a thing. So your new coach is not going to be able to be hired. If it's a guy who's currently coaching, like I said, you're not going to be able to do this. Even Dan Mullen, that team is theoretically alive, with what he's done there. So who knows? But like, it's going to be fascinating. So we'll keep tabs on that. I'm sure we'll be talking about that in future episodes. But that wasn't the only thing that happened this weekend. Indiana, big statement win at Oregon, snaps a long home. Was it 18 games in a row? I think something like that for Oregon. 18 home wins in a row. Indiana goes in there, snaps it. Not just snaps it. Like, I thought they were, for the most part, the better team that day. Like, I didn't feel like if Penn State had beat Oregon a few weeks ago, I would have left that game thinking Oregon was the better team and just kind of blew it. I didn't feel that on Saturday with the Indiana-Oregon game. It felt like Indiana just outplayed Oregon for the most part. Two very good teams, two teams that I would be stunned if they're not in the playoffs, and maybe seeded very highly. But it just felt like Indiana was the better team, was more prepared for that type of moment. And wow, I mean, I picked Oregon, so I went with the home winning streak and just, kind of the stars being stars for Oregon. That didn't happen. Indiana just, boy, Fernando Mendoza stock is just on fire right now. So I hope everyone loaded up on that, 2 months ago, because it's taken off.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. I was with you. I thought Oregon was going to win that game. I really thought, and it did turn out to be a good game, but I think the better team won. I think Indiana demonstrated that last year was not a fluke. And I'm going to use an adjective that maybe some people associate in a negative sense, but I will say that Curt Cignetti is brash. Just, like that. I know that a lot of people kind of will take that and think, oh, like I'm thinking of him in a negative sense. The guy has, he just exudes confidence. I'm not saying that he's arrogant, but he exudes a certain degree of confidence in himself, in his team. The moment is never too big. He's never ever seemingly rattled. If anything, like he'll demonstrate his emotions when he feels that the calls aren't right on the sidelines. But I could see why, if you're a Penn State fan, you're thinking, okay, this guy would be perfect. But to the point I raised earlier, I think if you're Curt Cignetti, you've got all the key ingredients. Even if Mendoza leaves for the NFL, like most people expect, I think he's built a program that's going to be a thorn in the side of most Big Ten teams. The fact that this was Oregon's first Big Ten regular season loss, since they joined the conference. So that had to sting, like they thought that, okay, this is, we're welcoming in this team, but we're going to show them what Oregon football is all about. And Indiana took it to them. The Indiana defensive line harassed Dante Moore continually throughout the game. So yeah, Indiana, congratulations. They certainly played well. And I think Indiana, you can start checking out those ticket prices for the Big Ten Conference Championship, because I think they'll definitely be in it on December 6th.
Yeah, they're in a great shape right now. In a way, Cignetti is kind of like this for me. I know he's not a major program at this point, but he's trying to get Indiana there. But reminds me it's like this generation's Steve Spurrier.
Oh, that's good. I like it.
Yeah, just like you never quite know what's going to come out of his mouth. He may take a shot at somebody. He may be self-deprecating. He may, just take a question and go in the left field with it. He's entertaining, whether you like him or don't like him. And Spurrier was the same way. He was a little bit polarizing. A lot of people didn't like Steve Spurrier, but he was always entertaining, and people always wanted to listen to his press conferences. And I think we could use more of that in college football, where we've tried to kind of turn everyone into a robot because everyone's comments get blown up and people get outraged at everything now. And so I kind of like that Cignetti doesn't care about any of that and just lets it rip. But yeah, that's kind of who he reminds me of. But just a tremendous job of his team getting ready for that. They didn't play very well against Iowa. I would argue they were lucky to beat Iowa a couple weeks ago and to get them regrouped, refocused, and go out there and win at an incredibly tough place to win. And yeah, they're like a lock for the playoff at this point, and they seem very close to being a lock for the Big Ten championship game, given the remaining games and some of the tiebreakers they're going to have. So it will be interesting. And if they get that help, you wonder if they play in the Big Ten championship, even if it's like, let's say it's Ohio State, because that's another team that's within 3 hours of Indianapolis and kind of takes over Indianapolis when they go down there. I would be fascinated to see an Indiana-Ohio State Big Ten championship game just to see what the crowd breakdown was.
Oh,
that
yeah.
would be very interesting. There'd be a lot of red, so it might be hard, but I would be very interested to see, does Indiana still turn that into like a home game, or would they prefer someone like a rematch with Oregon or something like that, where they could really turn it into a home game? But I'd be that would be a pretty electric environment, I think, if it was Indiana and Ohio State. I think we're trending that way because Ohio State handled their business at Illinois, 16-point win. Ohio State in control really the whole game, took the foot off the gas, didn't looked a little clunky in the second half, but that was 20-3 pretty early, 10-0 pretty early. I thought Ohio State asserted itself pretty well, but I also thought Illinois did a good job of okay, it's 20-3 in the second quarter, and I'm watching and I'm thinking, boy, they better get this under control, because if this turns into some 30-point blowout, I don't think they can get in. And it's not even that they wouldn't have one of the 12 best teams or the 12 best resumes. I just think the committee would look at them and say, you cannot lose 2 conference games by 30-plus points and get into this playoff. We don't care how many other games you won by how many points, or we don't care about anything else. You are automatically disqualified for getting absolutely shredded twice by 2 teams in your conference, despite injuries and everything else you want to talk about. And so they asserted themselves nicely in the second half by keeping it on the rails a little bit. And so I still think if they win out, they're going to have a pretty good chance. My SEC thing continues to happen. I keep talking about it every week. I'm going to keep talking about it. The SEC is going to cannibalize itself. It doesn't have great teams. It's got 8 or 9 good teams. It doesn't have any great teams. They're going to give us a lot of 9-3 teams when the dust settles. We're seeing that now. Oklahoma loses. Like we're starting to see like the chaos continue to happen. Ole Miss plays Georgia this weekend. So is Georgia going to get a second loss, or is Ole Miss going to now take a loss? And these teams all have to continue to play each other. So I do think Illinois at 10-2 has a pretty good chance to get in. The question is going to be, can they beat Washington in 2 weeks?
That's the game, because that'll be, if when Illinois and Washington play, is that, kind of like the elimination from the college football playoff. You never know, because, we were just talking about Oregon, Oregon and Washington still have to play. So it's like there's a lot of moving parts. That's what's making this season so fascinating within the Big Ten. But you're right. I think Ohio State had that game well in hand. I don't think Illinois necessarily played badly. I just think Ohio State, the talent that was there, and Ohio State, maybe I'm mistaken, they Ryan Day kind of admitted one of the frustrating things is that the team kind of took their collective foot off the gas, so to speak, in the second half and didn't have as much intensity. I think also Ohio State is kind of looking at ways to work on things that need improvement, like the running game, red zone offense, etc. So Ohio State, they're doing fine. They just need to, continue plugging away. But you're right. I think getting back to the Illinois-Washington game coming up in a couple weeks, that's going to be something to watch.
Yeah, I think it is probably going to be an elimination game, even if Washington beats Michigan. I mean, there's a weird thing that could happen where, not weird, but like Washington beats Michigan, which would be a great win for them coming across the country and winning in the Big House. And Illinois beats Washington, and then Washington turns around and beats Oregon. Do like all 3 of those teams just get in? Like at that point at 10-2, like maybe something like that could happen. But yeah, I think it's likely an elimination game there in 2 weeks. I think the Washington-Michigan game is potentially also an elimination game too. I think certainly Michigan's probably out if Washington beats them, but maybe not. Michigan's got enough. The problem with Michigan is their Big Ten schedule is not that great. Obviously, they play Ohio State at the end of the year, but in between that, I don't know. But they'll maybe they'll be able to point to like, well, our losses are good, good losses. And if Nebraska keeps winning, that's going to help them a little bit. But I think that could be. That's going to be a big one too for those 2 teams, which we'll talk about later this week in our next episode. But that was an interesting result for Illinois. Just kind of keeping them in touch, not letting them run away with it there in the second half. But let's go into Michigan here. Unable to get the win out at USC. I've learned that I just don't know I don't have my brain around Michigan. And I even said that last week. I was not like I was completely unaware of that. I'm a little bit self-aware on that I just don't have a good pulse on Michigan this year. When I pick them to win, they lose. When I pick them to lose, they win. So, whoever sends me the most money in the next couple of days, I'll decide, between Washington and Michigan, if I want to pick Michigan to win or lose. So Washington fans and Michigan fans, whoever bribes me the most, because I'm always wrong on what I say about Michigan. So, but that was a little disappointing the way they played, I thought, out there, especially defensively. Like, it just doesn't look the same in the trenches to me for Michigan.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If anything, what's kind of coming home to roost for me is that I'm just not impressed with the Michigan passing game, or I should say the lack thereof. I think that Bryce Underwood, you can see the talent. The talent is there. In terms of like just the raw physical talent, in terms of, the mobility, the arm strength. A criticism that I would have of him is that, and I realize I'm mixing my sports metaphors here, but it just seems like every pass of his is like 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Like there's no touch. There's not, okay, and that just the fact that he's a true freshman quarterback, again, you have to have these growing pains, but I just think that the passing game is such, or is lacking, that it's really handicapping the offense overall. USC kind of showed that, all right, if we can not necessarily completely shut down the Michigan running game, but we can make it enough where it's like, okay, if they get into 3rd and long, now they're really struggling. So I think USC has kind of provided a blueprint for not only for Washington for this upcoming game, but for the rest of the remainder of Michigan's schedule this season, how you would defend them. And your point about the Michigan defense, I think the pass rush is there, but the interior defensive line isn't nearly as strong as they were a year ago. The secondary is obviously susceptible. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But USC, I mean, I think that's kind of like a mental hurdle that they had to clear. They did it. The fact that they played against a team that likes to play a physical style of offense, they know that they can hang in there and take some shots and administer some as well. So it'll be interesting this week when they go on the road to South Bend to play against Notre Dame, because USC, their backs are up against the wall. I mean, they already have the one loss. I think, obviously Notre Dame, they have the 2 losses. So this is going to be a great game on Saturday night when we talk about it on our next episode.
Yeah, that's another game that feels kind of like an elimination game. I don't think Notre Dame can get in at 9-3 with the 3 losses they have. They would really basically have lost to like the 3 best teams on their schedule, and you start looking at their wins after that, and not great. Even though I think Notre Dame's actually really good, I actually think they're a dangerous team that no one wants to actually get into the playoff. I don't think anyone wants to see them in a wild card round. But if USC loses that game, well, they've got to win out, which would include winning at Oregon, and so they would really be on the ropes as well with a loss. So we'll see. But yeah, I agree. That's gonna be a great game. It's gonna be an interesting game. Just go back to Michigan real quick. I'm with you on the passing game, but like I knew that before the season. That's the thing that like I bake that into I've baked that into the cake with Michigan for the last 7-8 years. They have not had good receivers the last 5, 6, 7 years. They've not. I grew up, 90s, early 2000s when they had a stud 6'3" receiver every year, first round pick. They used to really churn them out. They have not been lately. None of those guys scare anybody, but that's been the case for a while. They just were able to overcome that by not, by winning the turnover battle, running the football, playing really good defense. And now I don't think this is one of their better offensive lines. It's certainly not one of their better interior defensive lines. I think their secondary is okay, but they don't have like that Will Johnson lockdown type of guy. I don't know. It's interesting. And, they'll probably go and beat Washington this week because that's what they do this year, it seems like. But I don't see it there right now. And again, it's not. I knew the receivers weren't very good. I guess I gave them a little more credit than I should have for being able to reload their lines, I guess would be the best way to put it, because I just don't feel like they've done that in the same way that some of the other teams in the Big Ten, like Ohio State and Oregon, have done, and Indiana even. But we'll see. Big one against Washington coming up. Speaking of the Huskies, another bit of a slow start, obviously, and then Damon Williams went nuts with over 400 passing yards, over 100 rushing yards. And boy, this is a team that apparently will go through some dry spells, as we've seen the last couple of weeks. But when it clicks, they are explosive, and it is something else to watch. First of all, I can't believe they're not I can't believe they're not ranked again. There's no way anyone actually thinks Virginia is better than them, right? Like Virginia's on 19 on the backs of a win over Florida State, who hasn't won an ACC game, has won one ACC game in 2 years, is 0-3 in the ACC right now. Florida State turned back into a pumpkin, as I said on Twitter. They're not any good, but people keep giving teams props for beating them because they shockingly beat Alabama at the beginning of the year, who wasn't at all ready for that game, apparently. And we're still giving Virginia credit for that. It's not a good win. Florida State's not good. So what? Like, no one is going to convince me that there's people out there who actually believe Virginia is a better football team than Washington. Like, there's no way that's the case.
No, I agree with you. If anything, and we'll have to wait and see for the results of this weekend, because even though Michigan is unranked, I think this is where Washington will get and earn the respect of people. The fact that they're going to the games in Michigan Stadium, it's at noon. Everything that all the travel things that are starting to become more and more part of the discussion when it comes to the expanded Big Ten. So if Washington can do it, I think they'll certainly move up in the rankings. But I agree with you. I think Washington definitely should be ranked. Now, maybe, and this is just pure speculation on my part, maybe they're being punished for the fact that the last two games, not so much against Rutgers, but the previous week against Maryland, that they had to rally. And so it's kind of like, all right, that's, why is it taking you so long to remember that you guys are in a college football game and should come out more commandingly than you have been. But that second half against Rutgers, I mean, they just pretty much put their foot on the pedal and never looked back. So I think Washington is certainly a team that's on the rise. It's going to be interesting to see when they go to Michigan on Saturday, how they match up.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating game. I'm looking forward to that one quite a bit. And then there's, Nebraska, who I picked in a close one. I wasn't super comfortable with the spread. It looked like they were going to lose. They pull it out. Raiola, had 3 picks, I think, in the game. The middle of that game just went totally sideways on them with turnovers. They rally, they win. They're 5-1. They're ranked, right? Are they now like 24?
They are ranked.
Snuck in the back there. And kind of what we've been talking about is kind of come to fruition, where it's like, okay, now you're through, a good chunk of the schedule. And I'm not saying like their schedule's cake the rest of the way, but that you've won some of these games that were maybe considered toss-ups. You do lose to Michigan, but you now are in a spot where you can start thinking about the playoffs and having a chance there.
Oh yeah. I mean, if anything, Nebraska, the fact that they rallied, that was impressive. So unfortunately for Maryland, I've seen this movie before with Maryland. I genuinely feel bad because I think Malik Washington is a star in the making. He was, trying to get his team into field goal tying position in the final seconds and just, kind of threw behind his receiver and couldn't make it, like on a 4th down. I just think getting back to the whole Nebraska thing, like you said, it's like they've got some upcoming games, but they should be, if not favored, should be in good position to win those games. So yeah, Nebraska can certainly start thinking about possible college football playoff, not to relitigate the whole thing, but how well can they block out the Matt Rule, or how interested are you to Penn State? That's unfortunately going to be part of the lexicon, for the foreseeable future. So I think as long as Matt Rule keeps his eyes on the road, I think his team will follow. So I think Nebraska's in really good shape going into November.
Yeah, they're definitely going to. There's so many Big Ten teams, and this is why, again, I love this about the expanded playoff. Now is there are so many Big Ten teams looking right now, like, hey, we got a shot, and same with same with all the conferences. But there's so many teams right now that would have been out of it, like that. No one would have cared about that Nebraska Maryland game,
right,
5 years ago. Now it's an interesting game. Like, exactly. No one would have really cared about this Washington-Michigan game coming up this weekend. Now it's an interesting game. Like, there's so many games that have meaning now. Everyone's like, well, the regular season loses. No, there's more meaningful games now. You could eliminate 90% of college football, by week 2 in the past. And now it's like you can't eliminate these teams right away. And so teams are allowed to get better because teams get better. Most teams, almost every team is not the same at the end of the year as they are at the beginning. You either get better, you get worse, whatever. But like, you can, look at Alabama, how much better they look now than they look terrible against Florida State. This looked like a team was going to lose 4 or 5 games. Now they're starting to beat everybody. So I think it's interesting. I like it. And, I hope we continue to be able to get these types of games between, 5-1 teams who can still say that they have a shot and are still playing for something. Chip, UCLA.
That is the field goal. That's the field.
Better win for UCLA or worse loss for Jonathan Smith and Michigan State?
Worst loss for Michigan State, I think, and Jonathan Smith. I think the fans are starting to get their, if they don't already have their torches lit, they've got the fire at the ready. I'm certain that people are starting to question, what are we doing here? But I just think UCLA, I mean, it's just one of these things where I'm glad like the national media is starting to pick up on it. Like Jerry Neuheisel is not the interim head coach. He is the offensive coordinator. Tim Skipper is the interim head coach, but Tim Skipper, to his credit, is not, getting all, upset about this. He's kind of keeping his eyes and focus where it needs to be. But yeah, the UCLA is definitely the feel-good story of college football, deservedly so. I'm going to throw this out there. Happy for Jalen Berger because, his tenure at Michigan State didn't go well. The fact that he went back to his old school and had a dominant performance is great. Now, I was suspicious of UCLA, coming back down to earth. Would they be able to maintain their focus? They certainly did against Michigan State. Now, can they do that for the remainder of the season remains to be seen. But yeah, Michigan State, they've got to figure out something because I mean, all they want to do is get to that magic 6 number. And it's one of these things where, it just seems like they're letting games like the UCLA game, kind of get away from them, and it's just impacting the overall record.
Yeah. I mean, I do, you got to give credit to UCLA for what they've done the last couple of weeks and turning around a season that was completely lost. And now they're probably thinking, boy, we can get a couple more of these and we're going to a bowl game. But this is a really discouraging loss for Jonathan Smith in Michigan State. You can't do this at home. You can't get blown out by UCLA at home. I've defended that hire. I like Jonathan Smith. I think he's a good coach. This is very much a step backwards for this program at this point. This can't be happening. You just can't. It's going to be hard to defend him if they have performances like this moving forward. He's going to have to. I've said it all year, and I said it going into the season. Like their defense is just not where it needs to be, and I know a lot of that is a talent thing. You need more time to get more talent in there, but they're not fielding a competitive defense. They're just not. Their defense is bad, and they got to get that figured out. Like you can have a lack of talent and still piece together a somewhat competitive defense. I mean, no one's asking you to be a top 10 defense with what you have, but you can't be just getting smoked every week and putting it all on your offense. To win some shootout where you got to score 40 to win every week. I mean, it's just not realistic. So that was disappointing for me. So we'll see if they can bounce back. Chip, any parting thoughts before we sign off here, and we'll do our preview show on Thursday for all the games this week. Another really good. It's a great game. It's a great slate nationally, but a lot of good ones again in the Big Ten too. But any parting thoughts here, Chip?
Just real quickly that my heart goes out to Purdue because they played Minnesota so tough. Only to come up short again. I realize, moral victories don't count in the standings, but I think Purdue, the Purdue fans should certainly take a semblance of pride in the fact how competitive they've been, and credit to Minnesota for rallying and winning that game. And I'll tell you what, I know we'll talk about it more later this week. Wisconsin's looking very, very bleak. And Iowa, they went in there and did whatever and whenever they wanted at Camp Randall. So Wisconsin, this is starting to look very ominous.
If you had told me on Saturday one of Luke Fickell and James Franklin are going to be fired, I would have said Luke Fickell.
I freely admit that.
So the next 48 hours, one of these two coaches is going to be fired. I would have said Luke Fickell. That was pathetic after the way they ended the Michigan game where he didn't use any of the timeouts to give his team a chance. And then to show up at home for that. I mean, that Ohio State line, I'm shocked it's not higher. I don't think you can make that line high enough. This may be a freezing cold take in a week, but like I look at that line like 25.5. Like I don't see a path where Ohio State doesn't win that game by like 40 points. I'm stunned it's that. It's like fishy how low that line is. But it was the same last year. I'm like, how is Iowa only a 3-point favorite? They're going to kill Wisconsin. And so I don't know. Maybe Vegas is just not wrapped their brains around how bad this team is, but they're awful. They are awful. And now it looked like 2 weeks ago, it looked like their coaches quit on them. Last week, it looked like the players quit on the coaches. This ain't working. They're going to need, and now all these jobs are coming open, and a lot of them are either better than Wisconsin or at least even with Wisconsin in terms of the quality of job. And you're going to not be very high in the pecking order for the potential coaches you could go after if you don't make a move soon, unless they're just going to ride this out another year and let the whole cycle go through. But that just seems untenable at this point.
I agree. And I predicted Wisconsin to win, thinking, okay, Luke's going to rally the troops. But like you said, it looks like everyone's quit. It kind of reminds me almost, I was just giving praise to Purdue. It kind of reminds me of Purdue from last year. That basically it's like a similar type thing where it's like the coaches don't know what they're doing and the players have kind of mentally and physically signed off.
Yep. So we'll see if there's any movement there in the coming weeks, but I'm not rooting for it. There would be a little bit of irony, though, in Ohio State beating Wisconsin by like 100 on Saturday and Fickell getting fired because of losing by 100 to his alma mater.
Yeah.
But it's going to be interesting. I don't think this can go much longer. And neither can the show. So, no. Thank you guys for watching and listening. We'll be back here in 48 hours with our weekend preview of all the great games around the Big Ten. Thank you so much.